We are back with another weekly meta report. Today is definitely not a slow day. Unlike last weekend, there were 5 reported events of 25 players or more that had top 8 cuts, top 4s, and winners all around. A big weekend for Disney Lorcana, leading into what I believe will be the biggest weekend in Disney Lorcana, with Miami TCG Con officially pre-sold out at 256 online pre-registered players to come to Miami to enjoy an incredibly wild event, and there will be more to talk about soon enough. Now, first, let's break down this weekend in its entirety. That's right, we removed the pie chart. We're trying a bar graph. Let's see what the feedback is for this one. But as you can see here, 40 reported decks. 15 of them were Ruby Amethyst Control. 10 were Amber Steel variations, which we will discuss. 6 Amber Sapphire, 6 Emerald Amethyst, 1 Amber Emerald, 1 Sapphire Steel, and 1 Emerald Sapphire. Now, the graph shows truly that we had a resurgence of Ruby Amethyst. 15 of them across 40 decks is kind of a lot of remembrance of the first week of Disney Lorcana in a way. But all in all, you can still see an overall display here with 7 different decks competing for the top 8 spots. And the interesting thing to note is if you look at the different decks as individuals, which we're going to show you in a little bit, you can see that there were some decks that didn't have an Amber Steel. There were some events that didn't have an Emerald deck in top 8. So you can start really understanding that the different events around the nation all have their own nucleus of metagames. And what's really interesting is that when you add it all up, it still looks like the overall information that we were represented last week. And there's not really an outlier here. But there are outliers within the weekend that we'll also discuss. So as you can see, this is the way it looks. But now let's break down the intricate and interesting things that we need to all consider leading into the biggest event of the year, which is Miami. All for one or one for all? In all honesty, Musketeer Tabard has shown up from time to time in Amber Steel Song's list. This weekend showed host to 3 of the 10 that were in top 8s were playing Musketeer Tabard. And they were also in different locations. These weren't all from the same event or from the same team. So it's very interesting to note that as the evolution of Amber Steel continues, this particular bodyguard lineup could be a game breaker in the mirror match. It could be a game breaker in the Ruby Amethyst matchup, which I would argue is already one of its better matchups. But a card like this just really removes all hope from the Amber or the Amethyst Ruby players, because now every time they get rid of a character with bodyguard, you get to draw a card anyway. So they have to constantly keep up with that card advantage as well. This is a very interesting list, and in particular, this is a shout out to a member of the Discord that did reach out to me and shared with me the Warp Storm deck list when they were being released. Now, what I can say about this particular deck is that it is 100% incomplete, but this is another thing to note, and I think that's important. I'm going to do this every single time. The proof is in the pudding now that building with your collection is possible. This player here didn't have more than one Tinkerbell. He only played one Tinkerbell. And that's just proof that, again, Amber Steel is just so good. And the core to Amber Steel is unbelievable. Even if you look at it here, the Musketeer Tabard might be playing the role of an alternate draw engine. You know, we don't have Rockstar Stitch in this list. So we don't have Rockstar Stitch. We only have 3 Ariels. We only have 1 Tinkerbell. What are we doing to make it work? We only have a whole new world. Well, we're utilizing the draw power from Musketeer Tabard with Donald Duck, with Goofy, with Hercules. The list goes on. Protective Cub. There's a lot of interesting decisions being made in this particular list, but it was able to get to a top 4 of a 1K. So again, the Amber Steel deck just proving another version of itself. If you want to see all of the different versions, we're going to go through it, and I'm going to give you access to it through our website. But this is just another proof here that any given Saturday, any given Sunday, your belief in your reps with the deck that you're creating and you're working on has the opportunity to be successful rather than just randomly stumbling upon thing that you have never played a game with. So it really does take into note here that a player's attribute to a deck is important. And it's also important to note that like you can't just simply pick any deck up off the street and assume you're going to succeed with it just because it succeeded. This is definitely a deck that was a homebrew concept. It was what the player had. The player drove hours to play in this event, which is even more shocking and honestly, tip to the hat to you, to be committed to playing Disney Lorcana. So I love these stories. I love being able to tell these stories of these players' success and different ways of succeeding in Disney Lorcana. It's not all about what is already out there. It's about what you have, and playing and succeeding with what you have is one of the greatest accomplishments that I can give to any card player. So tip of the hat for the top 4, and thank you again for sharing the list. Emerald Amethyst has continuously been just good enough. Still not creeping out an actual win, and in some cases, not even cracking top 8s. So having 6 of them in the top 8 this weekend is pretty much on pace for the information we've continuously seen in the game, but I still have to ask the question, is the deck good enough? Can this deck get you through an 8-round tournament? Is it like, can you really be honest with yourself and say, this is the deck that I really can count on to win me an event, to get me to a top 8 of an 8-round tournament? Most of the success we've seen with this deck comes from 4 and 5 round events, occasionally the 6-round event. But in some of the reports from the last couple weekends, there were none of these to be found. Again, I'm not at every event. I don't have all the meta reports for like the entire breakdown of an individual event. The events that I've heard and discussed with players that were there, I've heard, yeah, it was there. It was a deck that players were playing, but it wasn't successful. So this is the head scratcher for me, because my experience with the deck is that it has potential. It has the ability to win games. It has the ability to turn corners and have a threat, but I can't say that it can do it better than other decks. I can't say that it's better than Amber Steel. In fact, Amber Steel is its worst matchup, which is a problem. I can't say that it's naturally better in more matchups than Ruby Amethyst is. So while you might have a good matchup in the Ruby Amethyst, do you have enough good matchups against the overall field to be confident in playing this deck? Those are the questions that I need to ask going into any major event to understand that whatever deck I'm playing, it has to have a good matchup against the majority of the field. And for me personally, it has to have a great matchup against what I believe is the best deck. And for me, the best deck is Amber Steel. And no one has really been able to find a way to make this deck particularly good into Amber Steel without really alternating the end game of the deck. I've seen lists that have Ursulas and Elsas at the top end, which does create a different concept, but I don't know that that's good enough to say now I'm better in X matchup by 5 or 6%, maybe 10%. Is that good enough to say that I can take this for a full 8 rounds? That's my worry about this deck. And granted, I've said last week on the meta report that this is the best budget deck. So if that's what you have to play with, then that's fine. But it is an understanding of when you take it to the next level and you go from like this local 1K with 30 to 40 to 50 players to this, honestly, the biggest event in Lorcana in a 250 player event, it's a different scale and you have to make different decisions. And I'm just not certain that for that type of level of event that this deck is going to be successful. And I will be happy to be proven differently. And I will be very excited to see a budget deck go all the way if it is possible. And these are just the things that I worry about for this deck going into this particular weekend. Speaking, of course, of Miami TCG Con again, I honestly wanted to just give a shout out to the entire team, PBG, Miami TCG Con. All in all, they were able to sell 256 pre-registered players. I mean, that many tickets pre-registered. It's Tuesday, the day of recording of this, and that's awesome. We already know that we have a packed house going in. It's already the biggest reported event to date. I'm so very excited to be part of it. If you're looking for a full report breakdown and you're already enjoying this particular video, smash that like for me and hit subscribe. If you're looking for this event, we're going to be covering it all weekend, but of course, it's going to be broadcasted live on PPG's Twitch channel. The description will be in the link below, and the link will be in the description below. I'm sorry. I'm so excited. I will be commentating. We will have 2 other commentators. The official announcement hasn't been announced for everybody yet. When it does, I promise you that I'll be the one making it, so stay attached to the socials if you're not. All in all, this is going to be an exciting weekend for Disney Lorcana. 256 players is incredible, and I can't wait to be a part of it. I'm so excited to be there on the ground in Miami. If you see me, come say hello, give me a handshake, give me a fist bump, give me a hug. I'm a hugger. It's fine. I'm super, super stoked to be a part of it. I can't wait to break it down for you all next week, of course. But let's continue the video. Ruby Amethyst came out again with 15 of 40 decks controlling the top 8s this weekend. It also picked up a win at the Apex Gaming event. This particular list was reported from the Pats Games event from Ricardo Cruz, and I wanted to give him a shout out because he was reached out to us via email, sent us all the information for the event, and I was very excited to hear about the 55-player event from Pats Games in Austin, Texas. Shout out to the store for hosting the event, and a great turnout for a Saturday in October, for that matter. This particular deck has continuously just been there. It's been the most consistent. It has the most top 8s. It now took a bigger lead overall with having 5 more top 8s than Amber Steel this weekend. So it's increasing its grasp on its claim to the best deck in Disney Lorcana. This particular list is not my favorite. It is not a 60 card version of the deck, but there are still things that I think we can learn from it. This is a deck that plays 4 brooms, but does not play Mickey Mouse Sorcerer. This is a version that is all in on its removal package. 4 Maui, 4 Dragon's Fire, 4 Be Prepared, 2 Rafiki. I mean, the list goes on and on. We also see a Return of the Queen. We've seen that in and out of different decks, to be completely honest. This particular list has Pongos, but not Jetsam. We have Goofy, but not Tigger. We have no BLT. So there is a very, indication here that there were particular decisions made. Now, the one thing that I will say, and this is, again, I said last week that I would not be playing Ruby Amethyst. However, if you're going to play Ruby Amethyst, here's my little tidbits for you. If you decide to play the 1-drops, you should actually make a decision between them. And it shouldn't just be Tibbs. It actually should be Archimedes. And this is why. If you're ever in a world where you're trying to hide as much information as possible, there is currently no other deck in the game playing Sergeant Tibbs. So the moment that you decide to row a Sergeant Tibbs early, if you're on the play and you decide that you don't need to play your Sergeant Tibbs, well, you've already delivered the information of what type of deck you are, because there's just no one playing Sergeant Tibbs, which is a great reason to just play Archimedes, because Archimedes does show up in several other lists. Even Amethyst Sapphire, Amethyst Emerald has a potential to be playing it. So there's other decks that have it. So you get to hide the information of Ruby longer in a matchup if it does affect your opponent inking. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, this is the toughest deck for me right now, because I believe that the deck is very good. I said last week I wouldn't play it, but the reasons I won't play it are, as a player, personally, my personal preference in the game is not to be playing Ruby Amethyst Mirrors. I just don't want to be a part of that situation. However, if that's the thing you're into, that's fine. That's that's your choice. Just not a choice that I want to be making. However, this is still a deck that I'd get to 60 cards, 100%. And I think we could do it really easily here. I don't think we necessarily, I'm not even certain that you need Baby Aladdin, let alone 4 Baby Aladdin. So you can probably drop the Baby Aladdins to like a 2 of here. Uh, Honestly, I do think Ursula is better than Elsa in most of your matchups. So I think I would, at the very least, flip those to go to 3 Ursula and 2 Elsa. I do think that we need to make a cut somewhere. So I believe it's the Dragonfire, which is really tough to say. It's either Dragonfire or Rafiki, and that really depends. Like if you have 4 1-cost characters and 7 or 9 2-cost characters, like you don't necessarily like always need the Rafiki. So you might be able to just get away with cutting Rafiki, or you can go the other route and cut down on your 1s and 2s. Either way, you can easily get to 60 that route. But another avenues, of course, is the decision of like even playing the queen. I think in the finals for Apex Gaming, I think the player was able to draw like 7 cards off the queen. That's not always going to happen. And even when it does, it might feel great, but it also might have felt great if you just had like a better card in general to win the game. I think a lot of the issue I've seen with most Ruby Amethyst players is that they're way more concerned with like always gathering more resources than understanding that what's in their hand is already good enough to win the game. And I've also seen players just like flat out not ink the right cards at all. In all honesty, I'm going to drop a link in the description for a video by another content creator. His name is Zeph. He had a great video on the Ruby Amethyst, and I have to shout it out. So if you're looking for particular information on Ruby Amethyst, then check the description and check out that video because I think he does a great job. And anytime I can give credit where credit is due, I think Zeph does a great job, and I want to give him the credit. But let's get into the next deck. Rock, paper, scissors is a constant phrase that gets thrown around in competitive gaming. And in this game, it's I what's funny is in this game, before I go on too much of a tangent here, is that I view the rock, paper, scissors, I think, differently than the actual definitions of them. So that might be a me problem. But I view like the rock as like the overall best deck, and then the paper is the deck that beats the best deck, and then the scissors is the outlier that beats those decks. Um, and I don't know that that's like the true form of it or whatever. I'm not. I actually think it's like the rock is like the aggro deck, and the paper is the control. I really don't know. So the point is that in my mind, the scissors deck is the current amber sapphire deck that we're seeing, this mid-range concept of like just this abusive amount of draw or removal with the Hades package and Carefree Surfer and even Robin Hood to a certain extent. But this list is also playing Rockstar Stitch. It's playing a little more ramp, of course, with the Mickeys and the lanterns. Now, this is the quote winning deck from Level Up Games in Maryland. From my understanding, there was not an actual clear-cut winner. There was a cut in top 8. There's a lot of mixed conversations about what actually happened. There was a YouTube video posted in our Discord from this player's perspective, stating that he was the winner of the event. I don't know if they just interviewed him because he was the first place after Swiss. I don't know that. I haven't been able to confirm that. But regardless, if you're in our Discord and you're in the Discord chat for Level Up Games, you can find it in the deck section. You can find that video. This is just the deck that is really, really good. And I do mean that. Like, in all honesty, I believe that this is the best deck against Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst. I think it's phenomenal against those decks. However, it's only good. It's all right. It's almost always good against Ruby Amethyst. If you play it well, if your opponent can't find a way to get you off of your Carefree Surfers, then like this deck is great into them. It's like its success rate is wonderful. Amber Steel, it depends on the Amber Steel in all honesty, because If the aggressive version of Amber Steel that comes out and can go wide, well, that gives this deck problems. If it is the more mid-range version or the more control version, then you're looping Hades and your ability to like always have two guys in play that are like honestly beefier than like the normal cards that can just get grab your swords away. You have pretty good matchup into that version. But the problem with this deck is that anything aggressive, anything that goes wide is not good for you. Your Emerald matchups are not spectacular either. I'm not saying they're unwinnable, but they're not spectacular. Just because like your opponent has the ability to just continuously go wide, go wide, go wide, and you don't have an AOE, you don't have grab your sword, you don't have your be prepared, you don't have Tinkerbell, and you don't even have like you really only the spot removal you have is Let It Go and Hades. But they're also higher costing cards, and it's expensive to keep up with the on rate. You you don't have rush characters. Like there's a lot going on that can be problematic. So that's why I call this like the scissors, is that it's very clear, in between to beat the other top decks, but it's gonna have its struggles elsewhere. So this is definitely a meta choice. But it did pick up a win this weekend. Allegedly, I can't actually say that confidently anymore as I was a couple days ago. But hey, this is another deck that should be on everyone's radar. All of these decks are listed on our website, which we're going to talk about in a second here. But this deck plays wonderful. Honestly, I had a lot of fun playing this deck. I've had a lot of fun testing this deck. I do think it's a very respectable choice in the game. And it might be, quote, a winner's metagame, which is something that like I think we're going to cover in a future podcast, because there's a lot of conversations about the metagame and the winner's metagame and playing for the winner's metagame. It's a whole conversation that I think needs its own video, in all honesty. This is a deck that I think is a very respectable choice for this weekend, and I won't be shocked to see more and more of it succeed. Again, there were 6 of them this week. This is one of those decks that are expensive and can be even more expensive depending on your choices. Again, this is not a list that runs Bell, but I've seen versions with Bell and with Fishborn Quill, and restocking in other words, in other terms. But this version on the other side is the first time I think I've seen Lantern in this particular list as another alternate way to just set up. And I'm going to be honest. I've said this before. A turn 3 Rockstar Stitch is really, really hard to beat. So like, I can't even hate like the quote Exodia concept of it, because it's like, man, when it happens, like you're just so far ahead of your opponent that it's unbelievable, and it's really hard for them to catch up. So I can't really hate on the concept. Do I think it's the most consistent way to play this deck? No. But if you're into the more high risk, high reward level play, then this list in particular is it's really good. I don't really have anything bad to say about it, other than knowing going in that your matchups against wide aggro decks are not particularly great. Definitely on the draw, you can be very, very far behind. If you miss your one drop on the draw, like it might even be like a death sentence depending on what they played. So all in all, this is a great deck. It's a great choice to play on the weekend. It's definitely a deck that you need to play games with. Again, you need to understand when it's right to loop Hades. You need to understand when it's right to loop Carefree Surfers. You need to understand that like sometimes not playing for the Carefree Surfer is fine. Like if you're playing against an opponent that is managing your board well, that's like never gonna really let you get the Carefree draw, then just drop the 4/8 2-lore guy on the table and start gaining lore, because sometimes it's a lot easier for them to deal with the little guys that you're trying to set up the draw, and it's a lot more difficult for them to stop the 4/8. So you need to be able to make that decision as well, where you got to cut your loss. You can't always draw 2 cards. Same thing with Rapunzel. You can't always draw 2 or 3 cards with Rapunzel. Just dropping the 1/5 on the table with 2 lore, it's another threat in itself. So all in all, those are the one things that I think playing this deck, players that I've watched, sometimes they try to hold on too long to the Stitch Carefree Surfers and the Rapunzels, and sometimes you just need to threaten the board. But other than that, shout out to the player here, David, for his wonderful success in this particular event. Going into any major event, there are so many decisions to be made, and one of them is, can I be an outlier? And you can see here that there were 3 outliers on the weekend. There was one Amber Emerald Aggro, one Sapphire Steel, and one Emerald Sapphire. Now, these are all decks we have seen had success through the weeks. 2 months in, we've had different levels of these decks having success and different increments. Amber Emerald is one that we haven't seen in quite some time. It's been several weeks since we've actually seen a top 8 for that. The other two we've seen a little more on average. But, these decks are outliers. And with that, you have to consider them. Like, it's not, I said this before in a past video. It's like, these aren't the decks that I prepare to play against, right? Like, they're not the most popular, they're not the most successful. But as a competitive player, I need to know they exist. So if it comes up, I at least can make my decisions based on the information that I know. So when you see a deck like the Lemon Line Aggro come back out of nowhere, well, you just need to be weary that, like, okay, what does Lemon Line Aggro play on average? And you're like, okay, they probably play Cusco's, they probably play Manhatters, they probably play Stitches. They do have sometimes the just-in-time package. So they're gonna have Maximus, they might have Goofy and things like that. So, like, as long as you know the strategy of the deck, then you're not going to get beat by the outlier, right? Because this deck is not consistent. It's not the best. It honestly picks up more wins probably by your opponent just not expecting it or not understanding what your key factors are in winning. Now, granted, sometimes the deck going first is just untouchable. If they get the Lilo into Zimba, into Just-in-Time Cusco, or into Just-in-Time Maximus, whatever you want to do, it just flat wins the game. If they're willing to go to the extent of playing cards like Rapunzel and utilizing the bodyguard package a little bit more, it could be an overall better deck and a better experience to make up for cards like Just in Time. You Have Forgotten Me, which is another route that you can play, where it's just like, okay, I'm going to pressure, and then I'm going to take 2 cards in my opponent's hand and hope that that's good enough to lead me to victory and things like that. So all in all, it's a deck we haven't seen in a while, but you need to realize, like, hey, this is a part of the game, and I have to know that it exists, and maybe if it's possible, maybe you play 1, 2, 3, 5 games, nothing crazy. I don't think you need to play like 10 or 15 games against this deck to get the understanding of it. But even honestly, the best thing, and probably the most underutilized tool is, like, just take this deck, put it in Pixelborn, and like play 10 games with this week, and you might have all the information Like, in all honesty, like, this is one of the easier decks in the game to like truly play. So, like, rather than trying to find someone to play against, like, just pick this deck up, play 10 games with it, get an understanding how it feels, and then move on. And you can say this for all of these decks. If you haven't played any of these decks, you're going to Miami and you're just looking for like a little bit of information, take some time out of tooling your deck to play games with these decks. In all honesty, you should play games with every deck if you're really at the highest level of competitive. Like, playing just 5 games, if you have the time this week to play with every single deck I've talked about, will go a long way in preparing yourself better for an overall metagame. The next one, of course, is the Emerald Sapphire deck. This is a deck that I'm pretty high on. It was my unsung hero from the last event. So if you're really looking for a bigger breakdown of this, check out the last video. It'll be in the end cap here. And then, of course, Sapphire Steel is it's the best Bell deck. It's the best ramp deck in my opinion. It has the most significant ways to fuel and win a lot of games. In all honesty, this is another deck that I believe is really good against Amber Steel. And it's really good against Emerald decks. So its key factor of weakness is Ruby Amethyst. So if you want to live in that world of going, I want to be good against what I think will be the most popular decks, right? Now, this is from a player's perspective. Any random player, like if I'm a random player, my perspective is I think there's going to be a lot of Amber Steel. I think there's going to be a lot of Emerald decks. Then this is a good deck to potentially choose because it has good matchups into those. However, if there's a lot of Ruby Amethyst, you might have a bad day. This deck just doesn't have a great matchup in Ruby Amethyst. You can try and alternate the matchup a little bit and give yourself a little bit of an edge, but I still don't think it's a very successful matchup, which is kind of its problem. and it's reason why it hasn't had more success, because in the early rounds, if you just go and you get paired against Ruby Amethyst, well, then you're just behind the eight ball all day, which can be problematic. But if you can dodge, it's a really fun deck. It's a really good deck. I actually really enjoy playing this deck. I think it's a lot of fun to play. I think it has a lot of interesting lines and thoughts and everything like that. So yeah, all in all, these are the outliers. And the important thing to note going into the major event is like there are outliers. And because there are outliers, you just need to be weary of them so you're not completely caught off guard in the earlier rounds. So let's just talk about that real quick. It's the biggest event of the year. If you're going to Miami, um, you need to be prepared. And I don't know if we're gonna have enough time to talk about this before the actual event. So here's my tips, really quick tips. Bring snacks, bring water. Be prepared for a long day. Be really comfortable with the deck you're playing. Do not pick up a deck because you think it's the best deck. If it's a deck that you're not comfortable playing, when you get into a long event, and we're talking 8 rounds, maybe 9 rounds for this particular event, then like you need to be comfortable playing the deck that you are for a 10-hour day, in all honesty. So like it is way more important to me to go into an event playing a deck that I am comfortable with rather than a deck that like I can assume is the best. And there's many factors for that, because if it's a deck that you're comfortable with, that means you know your matchups better and you can make quicker decisions, you can make better decisions. And the best part about it is that you can tell when your opponent isn't making the best decisions against you, and then how you can, totally just flip that upside down on them. So those are my quick 3 tips of just water, comfortability, and snacks. Lots and lots of snacks. However, I did hear there is a vendor hall, or there's like little conveniences and things like that that you'll be able to get in the convention center, but you never know what kind of in between time rounds you're going to have. But all in all, snacks, water, being comfortable. Most important things going to the event. For those of you who don't know, we do officially have a website, and we're going to bring it up real quick here. So we're going to add it. And this is the forbiddenmountain.com. I have been sharing lists here as pretty much as soon as I get them. The only ones I don't have from the weekend, there were just during the recording of this, there was another set that will be up here probably by the time this even goes live. But check in the forbiddenmountain.com. That'll be in the link in the description. We're going to have as many deck lists as we have as possible that are shared. We have all the different deck lists. So you're looking for to see what the overall events of these look like. This is going to be the best place to find it. And of course, we're also looking to add player profiles. So, this is Nicholas Rauch here. He did a player profile for us. And honestly, shout out to Nick for helping out. But like you can add some more text here if you want. If you want to be a little more communicative about your deck and things like that, feel free to do that. Of course, the other shout out here is Corey Anderson. But right at the top of the page here, if you want a player profile, you just hit this button, you fill this out, and you become a part of our website, and you get highlighted for your success in the game. If you're one of these top 8 players that were playing this weekend and you're watching this video, feel free to check out the survey and join, because we want to highlight you anyway. All in all, guys, I am exuberant for Miami this weekend. There is so much to talk about. I am going to be on the broadcast, part of the stream team. I am so excited to be a part of this weekend in that manner. As a player, I would be just as excited, but to be the voice of it, to see the success through the other players, to cheer from the sidelines for my own teammates going to the event. All in all, I'm very excited to be a part of the weekend. I can't wait to break all of it down next weekend. I can't wait to reach out to as many players, as many content creators that are going to be there on the weekend, have conversations with them, get caught up from Gen Con, or maybe even for the first time meeting some of these guys. So shout out to everyone. I'm very excited. If you see me on the weekend, again, fist bump, handshake, hug, whatever you're into, I will reciprocate. Thank you guys so much, and we will catch you in the next video.